I mean, for us, everything always starts with the numbers. And so that's where I've always started. But then you have to go out. I have to prove it to myself, right? Because if I'm going to stand for something or if I believe in something, I have to know that it's actually going to work. And right, you can start to see, right, from different retailers when they kind of implement some of these technology solutions, how it changes their numbers. And that is, and right, and you listen to earnings calls, and I mean, that's what I will tell you. That is actually why I've loved this industry for such a long time.
Welcome to Clothing Culture, a fashion industry podcast at the intersection of technology and innovation. I'm Emily Lane.
And I'm Bret Schnitker. We speak with experts and disruptors who are moving the industry forward and discuss solutions to real industry challenges.
Clothing Culture is produced by Stars Design Group, a global design and production house with more than 30 years of experience. Welcome back to another episode of Clothing Culture. Today, we are coming to you live from New York City at the MasterCard Tech Hub.
And today, holy smoke, we've got someone here that has been ranked #1 analyst by Institutional Investor 10 years in a row. One of the #1 top 50 retail influencers, was managing director for Li and Feng's think tank, and now founder and CEO of Coresight Research. Deborah Weinswig is literally a retail fortune teller and maybe sometimes a reversal of fortune forecaster. But
Welcome, Deborah.
Thank you. I'm so honored to be here today.
So I love the name of your business, Coresight. I feel like there's a little play on words with foresight. Can you tell us a little bit about Coresight and its foresight?
Well, let me actually tell you about the name. So it's interesting. So we're a research firm, obviously, research and advisory. And, it's kind of, let's just say, as many who work with us, it's like around the corner, around the corner, around the corner. So this idea that, right, you are kind of looking ahead, but with data-driven insights. And when we were, kind of spinning out from Li and Feng, I wanted to better understand kind of how people remember names. And so people actually remember things with either a K or a hard C. So it's like, well, it's got to have, right, that sound. And I said, you want this idea that there's kind of a futuristic aspect and insights. And so, oftentimes I'll have people introduce us and they'll be like, oh, Deborah, she's our core insights. And I'm like, who knew that it was going to be that great? But actually that's one of the, like I said, we did a lot of research, even just kind of coming up with the name. And so as an organization, we really look at this intersection of, I would say, the consumer and technology, how they're utilizing it today, what we can learn from other geographies. And then what are the opportunities as we think about 23, 24, 25, especially as sustainability is becoming such, not only is it right being measured and right public companies have to report on it, but it's becoming increasingly important for the C-suite and the consumer.
Absolutely, yeah.
Deb, how do you navigate conversations today with retailers kind of just wiping their brow from all the craziness that's been happening, all of the pandemic fears, followed by inflation, then recessionary, which I think we just got an inflation report this morning where it's maybe eased a little bit. All of these things compounded, how do you navigate those conversations?
I like to be very organized and structured. And, you start to find that you're talking about similar themes and, kind of putting those into a framework. We called it 3x3, just to keep it simple so that people can easily remember it. So this idea that there are 3 new things to sell, right? And that's why I actually think that, as an investor, I'd be very long retail, which I may be the only person on the planet saying this. But the idea that you now have NFTs, that, it's not every single retail NFT, retail, consumer, CPG NFT, every single one has been a success, right? And it's just a matter of how quickly it's sold out. So NFTs are one. Secondly, you have data, right? Retailers have a lot of data. And as we're going into this cookie apocalypse, right, the data that they have on their consumers, and once again, anonymizing it and being able to, kind of really sell that to whether it's credit card companies, financial institutions, or whatnot, that's also another huge revenue driver. And what's even more interesting is this, what we all learned during the pandemic is the value of the digital shelf. And this idea that, from a retail media perspective, so if somebody wants to get a place on your shelf virtually, right? We've had, in the past, it was like slotting fees for the grocers, but this is a different kind of slotting fee. And that, I mean, I think Amazon really brought that to life in an amazing way. And so many of the retailers have, filed suit. So that's what they can sell. And then how they can sell it. So you have the metaverse, Web3. That's one angle, and still, kind of, I would say at the earlier stages. Secondly, we also have live streaming. Once again, that has been, whether it's the ecosystem challenge, the payments challenge, sitting here at MasterCard, I think that payments have been a challenge in terms of as we think about, kind of live stream. And the last is quick commerce. So this idea that, right, you've forgotten something in a city, you can, kind of, whether it's GoPuff, Getir, Gorillas, any of these quick commerce companies. I mean, you've got, Instacart, DoorDash, Uber Eats. Let's not leave anybody out.
It's kind of the impact of Amazon, really, to how we consume.
It is. I think, though, that if you can get it in 30 minutes or less, that you start to think differently about how much you buy. It's very European, right? How much you buy for every day. Now, none of us are walking to the fish market. Well, most of us aren't, at least. But this idea that if I want a piece of fish, that it can get to me in time for dinner, right? We start to bring less into our homes, for a number that is just, I find very interesting and concerning at the same time. 40% of food that's grown ends up in landfill.
Oh my gosh.
And if we could rectify that, we could feed the world 2.5 times.
Oh my goodness.
But it goes back to, right, think about, the amount that you bring into the house, the amount that goes out. I mean, we got, probably oversharing, but we got guinea pigs as a way to like compost, so they literally will eat anything on the fruits and vegetable side that, right, even that we don't, or parts that we wouldn't necessarily consider.
These guinea pigs that are on staff?
Exactly.
Okay, just making
Beanie
sure.
and gumbo.
Yes,
and
okay.
so, and then we started to be, we've started to try and actually work very closely with the city of New York on composting. And it's, everyone, I think you have to kind of figure out, because you can't do everything. And I think it can become very overwhelming. But if there's one angle for me, it's on the food waste side that I've really, from a personal perspective, tried to figure out what I can do to make a difference. And, it's just, once again, it's just scratching the surface. But, if you do a little more each day, each week, each month, it will add up and you'll see, and the thing is, there's a profitability angle to that as well.
Sure.
It's as somebody who advises on, what's next, what's going to work. We're talking a lot about all the various technologies that are out there. How do you know when a new technology comes to the table, this one's going to have a big impact versus some that are like fads that'll come and go?
It's interesting. One thing that we've been trying to figure out for years has been sizing. But if you think about it, I'm not personally comfortable with, even if I'm fully clothed, right, having somebody look at your measurements. And I feel like that's getting, kind of a little close to home, which is why companies like a TrueFit, right? It's amazing. So if you wear X and, this brand, then you wear Y and this brand, that has been tremendously successful because people are like, I'm very comfortable with that.
Yes, right.
So I think there's a comfort factor. I also think that when, it's interesting, I felt that like loyalty, it kind of was like, we have somebody on our team, actually he's on our global advisory team, and he used to run loyalty for Kroger. And I'm like, yeah, that's interesting and everything, but like, we're not really seeing with the NFT space, right? And gamification, and I get rewarded for everything I do, every, drop of air that I, breathe, whatever. The consumer now thinks very differently. So if you go to my favorite is Bath and Body Works this past week rolled out their rewards program, and you go to their website and I'm like, I have to sign up because I'm going to miss out on something. Mm-hmm. And this idea though, it makes shopping fun in a way, and it brings us all together. And I think community, anything right now, community driven. But I think that sometimes there's another technology that will ignite something that we thought might have been kind of, if you will, a bit more dormant. Mm-hmm. And, I actually want to call out, so the gentleman who runs real estate investment banking at Barclays, we had breakfast recently. And he said, if you bring me a few prop tech companies who all kind of do the same thing, he said, the one that we invest in, that will be the winner. And so he said, it's not necessarily that their tech is better or not. He said, it's just the one that happens to be kind of at the right place at the right time to get funding. Mm-hmm. And I actually think in some of the tech solutions, it's more mind share, right? Where can you tell a clean and clear story? So it's very easy to ingest, and that, right, we're not going to go through 10 different iterations in the boardroom, right? You're going to be able to come in and say, hey, this is why we need to do this, right? I mean, I can tell you the loyalty card thing, right? Loyalty program, gamification today. This is why we need to do it. Going into the holiday season, this is the lift it's going to take. And that is something, right, if you start to see others doing it as well, it's a very easy, I would say, connecting the dots and enabling decisions to get made in a way that is not slicing the pie 12 different ways. Because that's what I find is slowing down a lot of innovation right now.
Yeah, you always have to have the right kind of funding. You have to have the spirit behind it, that authenticity point that you're talking about, being able to be concise with your message. All of these things are incredibly important. And then, you also mentioned something we've been hearing a lot lately. A lot of the startups we've been talking to that have seen some great success, they've said, I've always been in the right place in the right time. So getting themselves in front of people that can make a difference are key. How do people who are new to adventure navigate that?
That's the $10 million question. I think that mentorship is very important. And I think asking for help when you need it. And that, there's so many people who want, first of all, I'm a mentor at more accelerators than I should probably mention. And so, but I'm a faculty mentor at Alchemist on the West Coast. And I learned so much from talking to, in most cases, they're not even at like an MVP, right? They've got kind of like a few scraps of paper. And it's fascinating. And to be able to help them pivot and then introduce them, what I often do, I'll introduce them to retailers who've asked me the same question on the other side. Because I'm like, if there is a, kind of a entrepreneur looking to solve a problem and there's a retailer who needs that problem solved, and you can put them together to figure that out. That is just, that's where sparks fly. And I find that to be rewarding. But also, there are ideas around, I've had conversations recently around how to kind of, display items in a way that's, for the consumer, they understand what they're buying and why they'd want to buy it, and that, anything to reduce the return rate. So going back to, there's many different ways to look at sustainability. And a lot of it is around, kind of images and the clarity of images. And if I can see the item from, right, a 360 perspective, that is, right, there are a few companies very few who are doing that right now. But I actually find that to be some of the, honestly, the most interesting. Why do we not already have it?
Yeah. Well, in addition to transparency of sizing, every time something gets returned to a warehouse and shipped back, you're burning both, profitability and fuel. And I think that's one of our big challenges. It seems like everything gets thrown at us. Adversity breeds technology. So as people have these challenges, technology finds a way in different areas to fill those out.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna give a plug for live streaming, which is I still cannot, as much as I can kind of like connect dots, why that hasn't worked here in the US. So right now it's a $497 billion market in China. It's like $20 billion here in the US. No. And we're only about 18 months behind in terms of when we started. The return rate on items purchased in live streams by different technology providers and retailers we've talked to ranges from 2 to 9%, versus in apparel, footwear, and accessories, an industry average of about 40%.
Right.
Yeah, 20 to 40% is the numbers that we've been seeing.
And so you start to think about just this technology, it would pay itself back in kind of the blink of an eye. But there are, from a lot of the projects we've worked on, because there are so many providers, it is a crowded space and there isn't a clear message. And I think that's been very challenging for C-suite executives to make a decision on which technology provider to utilize. And do you want to be in like a closed ecosystem? Do you want to be able to kind of restream onto your website? How do you want the consumer, what do you want their experience to be? Is it a community build, this, that, and the other? And that I have found to be, that to me is one of the greatest opportunities as it relates to sustainability. And I would say, that is probably at 23, 24 when we see what I thought we'd see probably, especially in the lockdowns, right? You had a phenomenal opportunity for this to work. It's just not its time.
And we're seeing as we move it in the online space, online purchasing is about 7% up this year, in line with retail. That's about 7% up. It continues to trend. There's all these dynamic things that are happening. I wonder with, and certainly that online space is getting more crowded and more challenging. When that space becomes so full and people are trying to figure out ways to have that voice, when you're speaking to retailers that have brick and mortar, is there this hidden opportunity that exists as everyone's clamoring for this space for more traditional, you had mentioned kind of before the pandemic that pop-ups were a big opportunity interacting. We're still kind of social people. I remember when years ago someone approached me and said, hey, I want you to invest in printing. And I was like, are you kidding? Everything's going digital. I'm not going to bother. But today when we find you're deluged with junk mail and all this stuff online and everyone's trying to figure out, who you are online and market to you, all of a sudden what shows up in my mailbox, because there's no junk mail anymore except for these beautiful curated catalogs that you can sit down quietly, page through, and then you order online. And I'm like, holy smoke, I missed it. Printing didn't die, it just evolved. What do you see on the future space for brick and mortar?
So I am starting to see companies who are, there's one company I know who's doing it, I'm sure there are many others, but ghost retailing, where it is actually a one-to-one in your physical store. And so, consumers basically kind of get in a queue and they will then have kind of a customer service associate. So it's almost this democratization, if you will, of kind of concierge services. And then, their intention to shop is there, right? That's why they're dialing in.
Yeah.
And so if you think of it, kind of Nike's doing this, American Eagle, just to name a few. And if you start to think about, if you're Nike, you want to really understand, the shoe, okay, I've got a wide toe box, I've got a narrow heel, I've got, these are the things. And if you can get the right fit, and then, you've started to develop a relationship with this person, that's a whole different relationship with the retailer, but you start to cut down, and you're doing it from the physical store. Mm-hmm. So you're also then creating this theater in the store, and you can kind of pull in other product. And, we've seen from an American Eagle perspective, is the person's like, okay, I want those jeans. They're like, now I need a sweater. They never even come in to buy quote unquote, come in to buy a sweater. Yeah. And that, I think, is where how we're seeing, I'm very big on physical retail. And, what we've seen in other geographies is this idea that, for different shopping festivals and whatnot, it's all about the physical. And you'll literally walk around and kind of catch, kind of logos. It's like Pokemon Go in a way, but you're actually creating things that have a real value, Mm-hmm. Dollar value. And to make the physical, look at what American Dream just did with, kind of Mr. Beast. Who knew people could eat that many burgers, right? We're seeing, and I think that there are these pockets of innovation and investment. And I feel like there's, we're on the precipice of some really interesting physical retail innovation, and it's not going to cost a lot.
It's so interesting. I'm hearing you talk about our future in this industry, and so much of what you're talking about is physical. Yet, as an analyst, I always think, analysts are poring over numbers left and right. They're looking at data points. It sounds to me like you kind of do a little bit of both. It's like looking at how a consumer behaves in their environment, what tools are going to elevate their experience and help build more loyalty, while maybe poring over some numbers.
For us, everything always starts with the numbers. And so that's where I've always started. But then you have to go out. I have to prove it to myself, right? Because if I'm going to stand for something, or if I believe in something, I have to know that it's actually going to work. Mm-hmm. And, you can start to see, from different retailers, when they kind of implement some of these technology solutions, how it changes their numbers. Mm-hmm. And that is, and you listen to earnings calls, and that's what I will tell you. That is actually why I've loved this industry for such a long time, is because a company can tell you that they're going to do something, and they can put a great acronym around it, and then I can go visit a dozen stores and take photos of all of them. And I'm like, I used to get chased out of the stores. They don't do that anymore. But I'm like, no, that's not, so you may be telling, your store managers, this is important. Maybe it is not easy for them to understand, but it's not being implemented. Mm-hmm. And so somewhere along the way, something is breaking down. And that, I think, is where it gets really interesting. And then there's other cases, and you'll start to see pockets of innovation where retailers have given their store managers quite a bit of leeway. And you start to go in different stores, and you see very different product assortments and very different ways that they're approaching things. And that to me also says something about how the retailer brand trusts their staff as well, and how they may have less turnover and all kinds of other, which is so key right now.
Yeah, that's a huge issue today, having enough staff.
I will
qualified staff.
One of the things that, that really, this is actually one of the most challenging ones with what we're seeing in terms of like loss prevention right now, and with organized crime at retail and the safety of store employees. It's like returns. People don't really want to talk about it, but I think
It's an essential thing to talk about.
I think I'm very involved in the Loss Prevention Research Center down in Florida, and I think that this is something, that is incredibly important to bring to the forefront. If you think about it, right, this is what's so interesting. Nobody owns loss prevention, and nobody owns returns.
Oh my goodness.
Right?
It's a core part of profitability of a business, that impact.
Part. And that goes, so this is why I'm so incredibly positive on the longer term, and it could be 6 months, 12 months, but of retail, because if you can solve these two things, which at the end of the day, yes, they are problems, there are technology solutions, we need to figure out a way to do it that everyone is comfortable, but there's huge margin in dollars that can be driven to the bottom line, even if your top line just continues to grow at that 7% rate.
Absolutely.
So I see solving issues of theft and returns really helping to improve the status of the retail world. I'm curious, looking at sometimes the time it takes for global issues to actually deliver their full impact on retail. We had the pandemic, we have floods of cotton in Pakistan. We have, regions being shut down for export, things of that nature. Sometimes retailers don't feel that impact initially for a year, 18 months. And so how would you advise retailers to get ahead of some of these problems to, keep things going?
So, coming from a supply chain background, I have to say I'm surprised that, right, we're still talking about supply chain, to be quite honest, but I think that I'm like, nothing like a good pandemic. Everyone kind of like takes a step back, looks at like their whole control tower, whatever you want to call it. I don't care, right? Whatever technology solution provider you're using. But I feel in many cases in the exact same place that we were in like March of 20, and that it really has not changed that much as it relates to how retail thinks about it. And at the same time, we're not seeing, we still have, this is so if you think about it, as people were planning for 22, they're like, look at how great, yoga pants were and furniture. And they like literally apply that same exact growth rate for 22. And look at how much big, bulky furniture we have and yoga pants. There are warehouses I've been to, I won't name retailers, that are like literally to the ceiling. And so I think that there are technology solutions that do this, but I think that we need to think about how we measure people, right? Because going back to, if we don't measure them, if we only measure them on the buy and not on the return, that's right, we're mixing metaphors, if you will. And so I think that we need better measurement, better incentives. I used to work in investment banking. It was a complete meritocracy. I guarantee you, if you treated these buyers, right, in the same way that we were treated as Wall Street analysts, right, your call, right, they're making a call, right? They're going long or short on a color, on a style, on a fabric.
Right.
I think that you would have, I think you have great talent in the industry. I just think that they would think about their job in a different way. And I think we might be able to get them better compensated and keep them longer in the roles that they're in.
But I think, too, there needs to be an education. I'm kind of shocked being on the phone with some of these folks that all of these global events are happening. They all do end up piling up. And I have these conversations about, we just want to exit China. We want to go to Central America, and that's going to solve everything. And we want real small quantities. We want them to be really intricately made. And I'm like, have you been to Central America? And 80% of our production's coming out of China. You're not going to fit it in Central America. And this conversation happens over and over and over again. And I'm just, where is the education for the retailer? Because I believe there's going to be a pretty stark awakening. You have to have inventory. If you're going to fuel, what's happening today. And I think there's a lot of dynamics at play today that are going to continue to impact this.
That is probably one of the best questions I've had asked, because when we joined Lane and Fung to run their think tank, the idea was that we would help, kind of pull together retail data, help, kind of the folks at Lane and Fung better understand the retail world, and then help the retailers really just kind of, I would say, connect dots. Our remit was never really helping, folks understand, because I think it was just assumed. Actually, that's maybe the problem.
They'll just fix it.
Well, or assume that, right? Like it's, of course they have a chief, kind of supply chain officer or chief sustainability officer, right? They know. But I don't, it was interesting. We had during the pandemic, we sunset it, not just because we've all kind of run in other directions, but we had a supply chain council, and it was all chief supply chain officers from many of the big retailers. And it was fascinating. I mean, I have to say, just some of the questions that were asked, the topics of conversation, where they flowed. I will tell you the amount of people I know, I can count on two hands, who moved out of China, into Vietnam, into Cambodia, into Bangladesh, and they've all moved back to China.
Demand exceeded supply. They overbooked like airlines do. Yeah. I mean, I keep talking to people about the importance of a portfolio. You always relate that back to stock. People want to just go down on one single stock, if you will. And I think today, the diversification of portfolio, understanding the strengths and weaknesses of each country, and diversifying accordingly is really important. But they just want to fly from one to another, simplification, if you will. And I think it's a dangerous conversation today.
It goes back to, I always felt that, maybe they could have used help with marketing, but with Lane and Fung, right, they really provided, at the end of the day, you have people who are supply chain experts.
Yeah.
You at retail are not, right, I don't expect you to be a supply chain expert. I expect you to be an expert in how you visually merchandise your stores, in, right, the kind of fit should be something that is like right up there at the top. And I don't necessarily, and so to start to think about where you want to, if you will, outsource some of these areas, because you're not going to be great at everything.
No.
And I think that some of it was cutting costs. I understand you want to quote unquote cut out the middleman, which I hate those words, but that is what people said to me. Mm-hmm. And I just think that, like, why not work with, or work together? Speak to your other retailers about, right, what they're seeing in terms of, but you cannot source out of one country. It doesn't work.
And the middleman conversation always makes me laugh, because if they understand how many hands go into making a product, 18, 30 different hands from the beginning to the end, it's just, our supply chain is pretty complicated.
It's, it's interesting. We sit in New York with Lectra, and so they basically can make product from end to end. So from determining fit, from dyeing the fabric, cutting it, and sewing it, all in about 2 hours. And it's fascinating, kind of as you start to sit, on a daily basis when I'm in the office, and you think about what could be. Now, those are, smaller. They could certainly run the equipment 24/7 and pop out a lot more than they are right now. And I've actually talked to different retailers. I said, like, why wouldn't we try something? What do we have to lose, right? Right. Think about the facts. This is like my dream. Is that, right, someone is live streaming, and it's like, okay, I want denim, I want, flowers right above my right knee, and, I don't know, I want a bee on my, like, left thigh. Okay, done, right? So we're now putting that into production, right? They've got my size, or I give them my measurements. And why can't we, and it's a garment that's literally been made just for me. I'm going to love that and treasure that for, certainly much longer than anything that I'm buying online or in a physical box. And it
can be real in the digital world, right? Today, that's for sure real.
Well, that's
an amazing kind of
You bring up something very
on.
Interesting in terms of, right, this whole idea. Nobody's running around the metaverse naked. And as we're seeing...
Some are. I don't know if you've been on there. Some are literally running around the metaverse naked.
But I think as consumers, it gives them... clothing allows us to express who we are.
Yeah.
Especially to others. And in the metaverse, right, you can have, you're having a good day. Maybe you have on like a bright yellow shirt. You're having a lousy day. Maybe you have on, kind of all black or something like that. But this idea that you can be whomever you want to be, I think sometimes when people kind of get back into the physical world, right, there is a bit of a disconnect.
There is. And that world's pretty real to them. And I think we're seeing that with the rise of all this digitalization. I remember kind of interviewing Valentin Karamanov out of Israel. He's one of the early pioneers for 3D design. And, you talk about the sustainability issue, which is a whole nother conversation, but he always likes to say pixels don't fill a landfill. And so, the digitalization and online, like you talk about personalization and gamification of your own avatar is a very interesting world that we live in.
I look forward to the day where we can actually take that outfit out of the metaverse into the physical universe.
Well, 3D print.
Yeah.
Yeah, 3D printer, something like that will happen.
So we've talked about a variety of technologies, metaverse, there's AI, there's programs for fit, there's live streaming. Are there any other kind of exciting technologies on the horizon that you think are going to just transform things?
So I don't know. I mean, I look at it as transformative, but how do we help employees figure out how to do more of what they love and reward them for that and do that in real time, and then also provide instruction along the way? And oh my gosh, I probably worked on this project like 8 years ago, and we were trying to figure out, I don't know, I've always been like, my parents did give me gold stars, so maybe there was just like too much of that in my childhood. So I do think that way. And I was like, well, what if somebody's at Starbucks and they could do like a 2-minute tutorial, right? And they get maybe it's a half a star. Okay. And then they're like waiting, right? And so that you start to encourage people to better themselves, but you are rewarding them. And so there ends up being this amazing virtuous cycle where, and maybe in the organization, right?
That's why you have guinea pigs.
Oh, I'm telling you, it is fascinating to see as the more treats that you bring,
of course.
the side of the cage that you go to with the treat. I mean, it is. I mean, hey, I like to look at things, and there are things around you that can change the way that you think. Almost instantaneously. I mean, one thing I want to ask, can I ask you guys a question?
You can ask us a question, sure.
All right. So we had a retailer come to us, and they're curious in terms of how can they get Wall Street analysts to look differently at sustainability? Because if you're making less product in less doors, right, as analysts, right, we measure you on comp sales and, kind of the sales from the current year. How can we help communicate to Wall Street why this is a better model, a more profitable model? But what numbers do they use? I mean, once again, as being a numbers-driven person, how do they measure it?
Yeah, I guess that would be a good question. I know that people have tried to show realistically that the entire supply chain would benefit by increasing the quality, therefore the costs are increased, therefore the retails are increased. The whole philosophy of the shift of the American consumer disposable philosophy to the more European investment philosophy in apparel. And I think that there's some good reasoning behind that. Sustainability today, based upon the very nature itself, is more expensive. It's almost elitist, which is a shame. And that all works fine until you start to think about two large countries, India and China, that are kind of moving into the whole fast fashion kind of game. They make us look like pikers, right? Middle class that served their total available market in India's 285 million with a lot of disposable income. China's probably similar to the same thing. So I think that's a huge challenge. I mean, I think that when we're talking about the growth of sustainability, how we make that affordable, the conversation really must start with the 10 major polyester suppliers in the world and how do we make that more affordable. Today, it's this kind of elite club mentality about sustainability, and we talked about it the other night. It is a fraction, only 13% of it is available in our market into something sustainable. So
Deborah, perhaps it's taking the model you were just talking about, give them a star for every piece of information they learn, because truly this topic requires a lot of education.
And I think our youth thinks you turn on the light switch and you're going to be sustainable. And it's a huge dynamic shift in our industry that's going to take a lot of conscious effort.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. The only thing that I've thought about, because, right, we want to get them, like you said, I like the STAR analysis. I'm like, I'm wondering if there's a way that we can measure R&D for sustainability and have that, right, as kind of like a line item. Because if investors then can start to at least see a number, grow over time, it's,
We have to make it more affordable.
Yeah.
We really do. Everyone talks sustainability, and when the rubber meets the road, there needs to be some intentionality in the conversation about the large producers in polyester. It's 55 now with cotton issues, maybe 65% of our overall production in apparel is going to be in synthetics. So it's going to be, I think it needs to be a really intentional conversation.
Well, Deborah, I know we could just talk all day.
This
There's
is so
much
fun.
we could talk about. But I definitely want to thank you for joining us. And I feel like there's going to be many more conversations to come. We'll definitely stay in touch. And
If we can keep up with her.
Oh, stop.
Holy smoke.
follow her on LinkedIn, by the way. My goodness, you're going to find some amazing
Try to
posts.
follow on LinkedIn. Where is she now? Holy smoke.
Thank you again for joining us. Make sure to subscribe to stay apprised of upcoming episodes of Clothing Culture.